It is time for the Thursday, January 21st, 2021 work session of the Portland City Council. Today, our focus is on unified council priorities, and we'll kick this off with Budget Director Kennard. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor, and good afternoon to you and to the council. Let me see here if I can get this full screen going. So welcome to what we anticipate to be the first of a few sessions with you to articulate and ultimately help you achieve priority actions as we manage through the multiple current crises facing our city. My name is Jessica Kennard and I'm the City Budget Director. I am joined today by Dr. Marquisha Smith, the Director of the Office of Equity and Human Rights, and by Director Andrea Durbin of the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. We also have numerous Bureau leaders on the call today to support your discussion and deliberation as needed. The agenda for the day is as follows. After this slide, I will briefly walk you through the purpose and goals of today's session. Then Director Durbin and Dr. Smith will provide an overview of key foundational documents that will provide relevant work and context to support your discussion. We will spend the bulk of the time today having a facilitated discussion around your priority areas and goals as you, as individual and collective leaders, seek to address the most urgent and necessary needs in our city over the next several months. We will close by discussing the opportunities to build upon and act upon today's discussion. The primary purpose of today's session is for Council to articulate their high priority goals for managing through the crisis. Through discussion, our hope is to be able to identify commonalities and shared goals which bureaus can support and Council may act upon in coming months. To support your discussion, we will be providing you with key foundational information and will work to identify and plan for the provision of needed follow-up information and support in order to refine and effectively act upon your goals. As you'll hear about in a moment, we at the city have many long-term strategic plans and goals. Given the multiple urgent crises we are wrestling with, we have scoped the focus of today's conversation to be near-term in nature. That is, what you want to prioritize in the next 12 to 18 months. Your near-term priorities will likely align with your longer-term goals and priorities, and we don't want to lose sight of the expansive and important work that needs to occur across service areas over the next several years. Director Durbin's overview of the Portland Plan will provide framing and context for larger and longer-term goals. However, the purpose of today's discussion is to narrow our focus to what is most urgent and necessary to ensure effectiveness in the face of limited resources. Today's discussion is meant to be an initial high-level conversation around your goals and priorities. We anticipate that you will need substantial follow-up information and support from Bureau experts in order to be able to further refine your goals and establish measurable and achievable outcomes. As part of today's discussion, we'll be listening for your request for additional information that will help you refine your thinking, and we'll look to provide that information to you over the next few months. Bureaus have a wealth of data and information they can provide, but hearing from you first will ensure we communicate precisely the information that is most needed to move forward on your goals. Today's discussion and the follow-up information will also serve to inform our annual budget discussions and decisions to take place between March and June. This discussion can also inform allocation decisions of future federal resources. Finally, today's discussion and follow-up information and conversations will help bureaus know how to prioritize their operations and communication with you to help meet your goals over the next several months. The City of Portland, on the whole, does not lack for strategic plans and goals. In fact, we have numerous council-adopted plans and hundreds of council-adopted goals on a wide range of important issues. These plans and goals serve to guide the many different types of services we at the city provide. For today's discussion, though, we will be providing an overview of just a handful of citywide plans, policies, and values that we view as most relevant to helping you think through and articulate your priority goals in this moment. I will now turn it over to Director Durbin to walk through the most recent citywide strategic plan, the Portland Plan.
Thank you. For the record, I'm Andrea Durbin, the Director of the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. Next slide, please. The Portland Plan is a long-term strategic plan for the city brought together by more than 20 agency partners and thousands of residents, businesses, and nonprofits. The process started in 2010 and was led by Mayor Sam Adams. It was a 2-year process that preceded the 2035 Comprehensive Plan update. Hundreds of stakeholder meetings occurred. Over 20,000 comments were received from community organizations, residents, and businesses, and it was adopted by Council in April 2012. The Portland Plan lays out a vision for a healthy, equitable, more prosperous city. It is organized around an equity framework, 3 integrated strategies, and a set of measurable objectives to track progress. Next slide, please. The equity framework sets forth a new way of working for the city and partners. It puts achieving equity front and center. This was one of the first plans to focus on equity for the city. The equity framework sets out an action plan to make sure we consider how our actions affect disparities among groups and address those disparities, and increase transparency and inclusion, especially for underrepresented groups, to improve decisions and build cohesion. Next slide. The plan focuses on 3 integrated strategies: thriving educated youth, economic prosperity and affordability, and healthy connected city. Next slide. The plan includes 12 measures of success, which help provide a snapshot of the current conditions in the city. Next slide. The Portland Plan recognizes that partnerships will be the driver of change. It recognized that successfully meeting the goals required partnerships and cooperation from many partners and community leaders and other agencies. Next slide. Here's an example of just some of the partners that were involved in developing the Portland Plan. Next slide. The Portland Plan has laid the foundation for many other key plans for the city, including the 2035 Comprehensive Plan, PDC or Prosperous Strategic Plan, the Transportation System Plan, and the Climate Action Plan. Next slide. The Portland Plan provides a critical foundation for our work together and our long-term goals. It was developed with significant community input and ownership. And given that it was adopted in 2012, and we are in a unique moment in time managing multiple crises, it would be helpful to have the City Council's feedback on how we make sure that this plan is a useful tool and guide for how we prioritize our work and decision-making, making sure that we are focused on community's greatest needs and that it serves as a way for the city to communicate our progress with all Portland residents. The Portland Plan did have some shortcomings from some perspectives. It may have had too many priorities, could be more actionable and focused on higher level outcomes that matter to people. And it focused on some goals that are outside the city's core responsibility, for example, with the focus on education. The pandemic and economic slowdown has brought even more urgency to find ways to encourage more cross-city collaboration and accountability, elevate racial justice, and more aggressively address disparities in our community, including income and health inequities. Today's discussion is an opportunity to start that conversation with City Council and determine how we make sure that the Portland Plan is relevant and a useful guide in helping us prioritize our work moving forward. And with that, I will now turn it to Dr. Marquisha Smith.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Marquisha Smith, Director for our Office of Equity and Human Rights. I warn you now, you're going to hear a lot from me today, so hopefully I won't bore you. So I'm going to walk us through some of the more recent adopted guidelines, resolutions, plans that I think really will be important as we're thinking about and engaged in this conversation in terms of priorities. So the first is our COVID-19 response values framework resolution that was passed in May of last year. And really what's important to think about in this, we've got some things that are highlighted here, is that there was an intent to really think about fiscal resiliency, equity, and really climate action and how all of that impacts our most oppressed communities, our most systemically oppressed communities. And out of that particular resolution, there was a toolkit, right? There was some actions that were specific to what we're doing with climate. And I think it's really important to that last bullet to think about, what does accountability look like? And for the first time with this particular resolution, there was something specific that called out, what are we doing to really make sure that we are holding bureaus accountable for what needs to happen as we think about our most vulnerable populations in the city. Okay, next slide. So as I mentioned, with that COVID-19 response resolution, there was a toolkit that was adopted. And this toolkit really provides key guidelines, key data, key information to really ensure that bureaus and offices think about the decisions that they are making as it relates to COVID-19 community relief and recovery efforts. We really saw the toolkit and it was developed in collaboration with equity managers from different bureaus and other equity practitioners across the city. But really the intent was to provide some foundation around what populations are we talking about who have most disparately been impacted by COVID. And in that, how are we really thinking and being very purposeful about our fiscal decisions, about anything that has to do with relief and recovery efforts. And so this toolkit provided guidelines and data to really help guide that conversation. And so the toolkit will be, I think, very useful in the months to come as we're thinking about some near-term work that we have to do. Okay, next slide. And then in June 17th, actually, we adopted our core city values resolution. This came also as we had adopted Juneteenth as a holiday, a paid holiday for employees across the city. And the city core values resolution, I think, is really key to keep in mind, because if you see at the middle of this slide, anti-racism, equity, transparency, communication, collaboration, fiscal responsibility are really the heart of what we're talking about. And each of these can be broken down. We don't have time to really get into that today. But I think, you know, when we say that these are our values, how is that showing up in the decisions that we're making and the conversations that we're having and the ways that we're interacting with community? How are we really living this, right? How are we walking the walk and talking the talk? And our core values resolution brings us back to that. And so this is something that we've really been pushing in different spaces to make sure that it is top of mind in our conversations. Okay, next slide, Jessica. And we have here the People's Plan, not necessarily a new plan. This actually was rolled out in the spring of 2016. But I think it's important to mention here, because what we do have that is new, that was some new work that happened over the summer, was Reimagine Oregon. And the People's Plan really was sort of the impetus for Reimagine Oregon work. People's Plan laid out what fiscal resiliency looks like, what education looks like, what community engaged policing look like. So all of the components of the People's Plan really are sort of, feeding into what we now have with Reimagine Oregon. And the thing to think about with Reimagine Oregon is the way that that particular document is laid out is that there are jurisdictions that have specific roles and responsibilities. And so City of Portland is a part of that work. There is some work that we've moved on, other things that we are, in discussion about and really sort of thinking about. But I think it's important to put these two pieces here. And the other thing to mention about these two plans is that they really are getting at the core of our Black community in Portland. And that was the foundation, right, and the thinking here. And I know in the People's Plan, a lot of the questions were around, where can you be Black in Portland, right? What would this look like? If we had the resources and the supports that we needed, right, to be resilient and to really, thrive here as a community. And so I think these two plans are very vital as you're thinking about, where your priorities lie and how we can move on that. Okay. I think next slide, Jessica.
Yeah, so as you've just heard briefly, there are many values, plans, and documents that offer support and guidance to all of us, all Bureau staff and implementers, as well as to you all, to transform and improve Portland. The work in front of us now is to connect and reframe and really focus these values and these plans, given the multiple crises we currently face. Specifically, the financial impact of the pandemic implores us to be relentlessly focused on what is most necessary and urgent in order to ensure progress is made. So we wanted to provide you with some brief context. We are happy to go into more detail if you'd like, but as I mentioned earlier, the bulk of today is really about creating space for you all to talk about your individual priorities and to have a facilitated discussion around those priorities. So try to find those areas of alignment and consensus and help us support you as Bureau leaders and Bureau staff in achieving those priorities. So we'll now commence with the discussion portion of the work session. I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Smith, who's setting aside her Bureau Director hat in order to don her facilitator hat for your discussion.
Thank you, Jessica. I told you we were going to hear a lot from me today. So this slide, if you were able to check your inbox, all that lovely email, you probably would have seen this. And these were a couple of questions that were really kind of grounding questions we wanted you to think about in terms of, what are your priorities, and then how would you define success, right? What are indicators of success within that? And so just sort of thinking about that, we're going to walk through kind of a facilitated discussion. I don't want to feel like, there are so many bumpers or boundaries on it that folks can't also freely sort of talk about what's coming up for them. But I want to make sure that we have enough time to engage everyone, and that you have your time for questions or comments as are necessary as we go through this conversation. So those are the questions that we posed to you. So you can kind of be thinking about that. Okay, next slide. And I'm a very visual person, and so I slipped this one in here, Jessica. So Jessica, had a slide a couple slides ago that really sort of listed, right, in print, the crises that we are going through. And for me, again, like having a visual of what that means and what that looks like, I think is, again, keeping it personal, local, and immediate, it just really makes it very profound. Like I can't forget that, right, when I see that image. And so what I want us to do here is just pause for like a minute. You see some images here on the screen. They are reflective, again, of the words that Jessica shared in a couple of slides before. So I want you to take a minute, see what's here, and then I want you to articulate, and we'll give you time, you can come off mute, like one word that's coming up for you as you look at these images, what you see before you. So we'll just give you a minute to do that. Okay, a couple more seconds. Okay, I'm gonna start with you, Mayor. What's your one word that's coming up as you think about these images here? Do you see these images?
The one word is related.
Okay.
These are all
you.
related.
Okay, so related. Thank you. Let's see, Commissioner Maps, what's coming up for you? You're on mute.
Now it's an official meeting. The word that comes up for me is also literally printed on the slide, and that's crisis. Here we have what, 3, 4, 5 or 6 urgent crises. That means just really acute problems that require urgent and immediate action.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Maps. Commissioner Rubio.
I had 2 words that came to mind. One is urgency, and one is overdue.
Thank you. I was a teacher, so I can give you 2. It's all good. Okay. See, Commissioner Hardesty.
Yes, ma'am.
So what's coming up for you? What's your one word as you see these images?
Normal.
Okay, thank you. Shouldn't be, but here we are, right?
But our new reality, right?
Yep, absolutely. And Commissioner Ryan, what's coming up for you?
Okay, the trick about going last is you don't want to repeat someone's word, right? So
That's okay. That's okay.
For me, it was urgency, and yeah, I'll just say it again, urgency.
Okay, all good. No right or wrong, right? Again, sort of putting some visual, right, to what we're hearing about, right, what we're experiencing. This is, I think, not just stuff that we're experiencing in our head, but we don't think about the physical impacts, right, that this is having on us. And sometimes just sort of like naming that, like what does that mean? So we think about it in our work context, which is what we're discussing here today. But I think it's also important to sort of name like what's coming up, right, for you as you are in the midst of all of this. Like we're all trying to navigate this from both a personal and professional level, right? So, okay, so next slide, Jessica, please. So as we mentioned, we kind of gave you a little bit of a homework assignment. It's okay if you did not get a chance to complete that, because we're going to take a little bit of time and have you do that now. But we wanted each of you to sort of share your 3 or 4 priority areas when you think about how we're addressing these immediate crises, right? And, you know, when you think about just 3 or 4, right, it's like, how do you really sort of distill this down, right, into that when like all of this is a priority? Maybe that's what you're thinking, right? But like, what are those 3 or 4 priority areas that, you know, are central to what you are thinking as, again, we are trying to, in this facilitated conversation, get a sense of where we are in agreement, right? Where there's some divergence, where there are places where we can collaborate and kind of learn and grow from one another. And so I'm going to give each of you an opportunity to respond to this. And I want you to try and just kind of list, right? So right now we're not going to get too much into the explanation piece because we have a bigger chunk of our conversation where you can kind of dig a little bit deeper into this. But right now, just sort of what does that list look like for you? What would you name on this list as your 3 or 4 top priority areas as you're thinking about the crises that we are currently experiencing in the midst of? So would it be helpful to give you all like a minute or 2, or are you ready to jump in? I can do either way. What we need, we ready to just go for it?
I'm ready to go.
Okay, I see thumbs up. All right, so since you came off mute first, Commissioner Maps, you get to volunteer first. So just name those 3 or 4 areas for everyone.
Sure. I'm deeply concerned about, you know, certainly all the issues that were on the slide, but in addition to those, or in the issues I'm going to talk about also appear on the slide, I think quite literally, I'm concerned about public safety, and here I assume we're just interested in broad areas. I could break that down into more specific issues like gun violence, reducing lawlessness, reducing disparities in arrest rates for people of color. I don't know if you want that level of detail now.
Not yet.
Okay.
So if you just say public safety, that's good.
Okay, public safety, housing stability, houselessness, and livability.
Okay. All right, thank you very much.
Sure.
I'm jotting notes too as we're going. Okay, Commissioner Hardesty, you ready?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
And again, you just want the headlines. You don't want the details, right?
Just the headlines right now.
Okay. So community safety, smart transportation, and houselessness.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. All right, Mayor.
Safety, homelessness, and livability.
All right, Commissioner Ryan.
Oh, I was unmuted. Houselessness, emergency, community safety, and economic survival.
Now, did you say houselessness, emergency? Was that together? How did you say that?
It was.
Okay,
It was.
so houseless, emergency, community, say them again for me.
Community safety would be the second one. And then the third one I mentioned was economic survival.
Okay.
And prosperity.
Okay. Would you put those together?
I would say economic survival / recovery.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. And Commissioner Rubio.
I have the broad headlines: houselessness and housing crisis, economic recovery for businesses and community. And then I have community safety and engagement. And then I have arts community recovery.
Okay. Thank you very much. Excellent. Okay, so hopefully you were listening to your colleagues and you noticed that there is some overlap in the things that you have named, right, at a broad level. And that's a wonderful thing, right? So you're going to make this super easy. We'll be done in like 5 minutes. No. Just teasing, just playing. So with that being said, so here's the thing. So even as we are naming and sort of hearing, right, we're hearing houselessness, housing, right? I heard economic stability, recovery, livability. That was another one that I heard come up a couple of times. So even though we're saying the same words or phrases, okay, follow me, how we define that can often be very different. Is everybody with me, right? So what houselessness, like what that looks like or how that's defined for Commissioner Ryan, even though Commissioner Rubio, right, might have said houselessness too, they could be thinking about some very different things, okay? And so that's where we really sort of have to, yes, we've named those priorities, but as we're thinking about this information, what perspective, like how are we entering into a conversation about houselessness, and how is that maybe the same or different from a colleague? Because here's the thing, that's going to impact the goals and the sort of things that you want to do to get after that. So if there's some I won't say just disagreement, right, but just sort of some different ways of which that, you know, how you're defining that, when it gets down to like, okay, what are the goals that we're going to use to kind of get after it? It could be all over the place, right? Because we don't have a synergy around how we're really defining this work. Okay, so I'm going to kind of challenge you a little bit here. Okay, so, and Jessica, we can just stay on this slide for just a couple of more minutes, and then we'll go to the next one. So public safety came up, right? And then Commissioner Mapp started to kind of dig a little bit, right, to drill down a little bit into what that means for him. I want to just give you an opportunity, okay, quick opportunity, to really sort of share, like, when you say public safety is a priority for you, how are you defining, what is your perspective around public safety? Because that came up, right? Other folks said it too, right? What does that mean to you, Commissioner Mapps?
Sure. There are three things I'd like to focus on in this area: reducing gun violence, reducing lawlessness, which we might, I think of operationalizing as reducing the number of times we declare riots every month, for example. And the third issue that I'd like to highlight here would be reducing disparities in arrest rates for African Americans.
Okay, thank you.
I have more, but I think I should continue.
No, that's good. That's good to kind of get. So you're hearing like what's coming up for Commissioner Mapps is he's saying public safety. Okay. Okay, Mayor, you said safety. You didn't say public safety, but I'm gonna just call on you. You said safety. What's coming up for you? So you heard Commissioner Mapps, right? Kind of drill down a little. How would you drill that down?
Not dissimilarly. You know, from our planning, we know that we already agree as a council that everybody in Portland deserves to feel safe and secure and protected by our local public safety programs. Local governments have historically provided public safety services through police agencies and only police agencies. And as leaders, I think we increasingly appreciate that safety looks and feels different to different people. We understand that more and different tools are needed, that police agencies are part of a broader public safety system, but they are not the system. So my focus would be twofold. Number one, ensuring that the Portland Police Bureau is responding to the right situations in the right way, equipped with the right training and the resources to meet the need. And second of all, to ensure that we continue to build out our broad array of complementary city services so that whatever the situation, we have a variety of tools to respond with, and that we're able to help every Portlander feel safe, secure, and protected in our community, and the resources that the system needs to meet the need. And again, what I heard in terms of commonality, this work needs to be urgent, it needs to be holistic, it needs to be thoughtful, and it needs to be collaborative. And you know, there's sort of maybe 5 key watchwords or phrases I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about how to achieve these two things. It's gun violence reduction and the work that we do through OVP and our regional partners, a coordinated citywide approach to public safety event planning. That includes both police and non-police responses, coordinated budget proposals, savings, and alignments along the lines of what we're working with through our joint public safety budgeting, community input and council clarity on core patrol services and what the appropriate level of support and resources are for the police bureau. And of course, non-policing responses to traditionally police responses like the Portland Street Response Launch. So that's what I think about when I think about safety.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, Commissioner Hardesty, you also mentioned community safety. So
Yes.
what's coming up for you when you define that? What does that look like?
When I talk about community safety, some of the components are actually continuing to work with the Office of Violence Reduction to reduce gun violence in our community. Working with a Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing around developing a truth and reconciliation process, implementing the new police oversight system, better tracking and response to the increase in domestic violence, and then, of course, rolling out and expanding Portland Street Response.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Okay, Commissioner Ryan, you also mentioned community safety.
Yes. I just use 3 categories, I guess, under this. Police accountability, building the mental health system with the county, and then safety on our streets, which others have mentioned with more probably tactical, reducing gun violence, but just a general feeling that a lot of people don't feel safe right now.
Okay, thank you. I had a little voice in the background that needed some attention. Listen, the little one is out of here. The grown, the older one. Yeah, I got rid of the little one. Now the 10-year-old, I'm like, you can't do that to me. Sorry about that. Okay, and Commissioner Rubio, you mentioned community safety as well.
I put down reimagining a safety system that centers community and is representative of community. And this includes implementation of police accountability system and also the hiring of the public safety director. And then I also put authentic community engagement. Specifically, I'm interested in engaging Latinx youth in the immigrant community in this important discussion and conversations about what this should be. And then last, I put more upstream programs that services aimed at youth and community connection.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit for a moment about livability, because I believe Commissioner Mapps and the mayor named it as livability, right? So those words came up. However, I don't want to leave out Commissioner Hardesty, Commissioner Ryan, or Commissioner Rubio if something that you named would be considered livability. So I want to make sure that we are, because again, the words, we're trying to get some synergy here. But I heard livability specifically from the mayor and Commissioner Mapps. Of our other 3 commissioners, is there anything in what you named in your priorities that you in your mind would say, oh yeah, that's livability, I just didn't call it that, right? So I want to make sure I'm giving the opportunity for that. So
Dr. Smith, it would be helpful if Commissioner Mapps and the mayor shared what their definition of livability is.
Okay, for sure. We can do that. And then I can get your juices flowing. Okay, so Mayor, when you said livability, how are you defining that? What does that mean to you?
I'm speaking very narrowly to the urgency of what's in front of us today. So that is the condition of public right-of-ways, parks, private right-of-ways, litter collection, graffiti abatement, biohazard cleanups, and the like. That's what I'm talking about when I'm specifically referring to livability.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Mapps,
I would echo the themes that the mayor talked about. The three themes that I actually wrote down for today would be increasing the economic viability and vitality of our neighborhoods. I'd like to see a reduction in the number of disorder type calls placed to 911. And I'd like to continue our march towards building complete neighborhoods, neighborhoods with parks and grocery stores and whatnot.
Okay, so some similarity in what you were naming there. Okay, does that help Commissioner Hardesty to kind of give you a sense of what they're calling in their mind livability?
It does. I actually, with the mayor's definition actually is more along what is the continuum of services for our houseless community members, right? And how do we make sure that we are providing some basic services for those folks so that they're not in the right of way and we don't have houseless people on every freeway exit, and the biohazards that are associated with people who don't have a safe place to do what humans do. And then what I heard from Mingus was really more like tactics to create livability, right? I love the idea about complete neighborhoods. I don't think we've had that conversation for a decade or so. So it is interesting to have someone bring up the whole idea of what's a livable neighborhood and what's a complete neighborhood, right?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so I don't disagree with anything that either Commissioner Mapps or Mayor Wheeler said. I just think that we talk about it in different ways. So I don't disagree with any of it.
Good, and I think you brought in that overlap, right, with what's happening with our houseless community, right? Like, how does that also sort of feed into what we talk about when we say livability? So very good. Okay, Commissioner Ryan or Commissioner Rubio, anything to add, or anything from your list of priorities that there may be some overlap as you think about livability? You've heard what your colleagues are thinking.
Well, with Commissioner Mapps's definition about those whole neighborhoods or the complete, that really struck me as well. So I feel like while I didn't explicitly say that in mine, I feel like that concept is resonant with what I have been thinking as I went through these as well. To me, the livability is the quality of life that we're providing equitably to everybody, every resident in Portland. They should all have access to those complete neighborhoods and to that experience of feeling safe.
Good, thank you. And Commissioner Ryan, anything to add?
I think for me, livability comes to each neighborhood and as a core experience when we actually provide the services necessary for the houseless community. And so we see a real change there, that we start to experience real community safety. Mm-hmm. And when we have some economic renewal. And so I guess it's an overarching word that I would use to describe the three priorities that I listed. And so I just chose to not use one of them as my language of the three strategies, but more maybe a overarching goal of them.
Yeah, you're all on top of it. Right? I love this.
Yeah, so I see it more like an arch, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very good. Right. So there's.
I enjoyed hearing the detailed descriptions of my colleagues, both the mayor and Commissioner Mapps, what they meant by that.
Excellent. Okay, I'm going to pick another one here because this has come up. Let's see. So Commissioner Mapps talked about housing stability, and let's see if it was named that way in other places. So we've got housing stability, we've got housing, right? Just kind of in general, that was a term that came up. So Commissioner Rubio said housing. As I said, Commissioner Mapps said housing stability. the mayor, I think you named it as housing. Am I correct? I'm trying to read my chicken scratch here.
No, I specifically named it more broadly as homelessness.
Homelessness. Okay, so homelessness, and Commissioner Ryan named it as well, houselessness. Commissioner Hardesty, I think you said houselessness. Yes. And so housing, houselessness, housing stability. Want to make sure we're all on the same page around that. I think we are, but just kind of just a brief conversation there, because so the housing stability, just that term sort of stands out, right? But I want to give Commissioner Mapps an opportunity. Does that also sort of encompass, right, these terms of houselessness, homelessness, right? Is that what you're thinking as you're thinking about housing stability? I want to make sure I'm giving some opportunity, because that was a phrase you specifically used.
Sure. And in my priorities, I actually broke out housing stability and homelessness as being two separate issues. And I think of them as being obviously related, but two separate issues. It may help to kind of break down housing stability even further from my point of view. I think there are some short-term problems, which are frankly just COVID related. You know, that boils down to rent relief, aid to landlords, and developing a plan for avoiding an eviction crisis when our eviction moratorium is lifted. So I think that's very important, very short term. This is something I hear about a lot. And then there's a long-term or medium-term piece of housing stability, which basically gestures towards Commissioner Ryan's portfolio, developing new affordable housing units, building more, making sure that we have enough affordable housing. If I were to break it down into, it seems like here we're not so much focused on our day-to-day bureaus, but sort of emergent issues that are pressing. And if I had to do it that way, I would really focus in on the COVID crisis and how it relates to housing. I think we've done okay so far, but I think it's a delicate balance, and getting this right is very important.
Okay, thank you, and that's helpful. So, and I apologize, housing stability and houselessness were separate for you, although related, right? But separate. I think that's important to note, because I don't want to, I want to make sure I'm honoring what it is that you've identified. Right. So, colleagues, anything that resonates with you there? Are you, based on what Commissioner Mapps has said, are you sort of seeing that as maybe a part of the conversation around houselessness, homelessness, the way in which you've named it? Anything different, anything to add before we move forward?
So I will just say that I support Commissioner Mapps' description of housing stability. And I think as we talk houseless, we've got thousands of people that are living on the street now. We've got tens of thousands of people with the potential to live on the street after March, when the moratorium expires, or when the back rent will be due for people who, in fact, have not been able to pay rent since March of last year. So for me, that's where the crisis is what's going to happen in 60 plus days when all of a sudden landlords are fast tracking people for eviction. And so for me, that's a really, if we're talking housing stability, we've got tens of thousands of people that are unstable now, and everything depends on governmental actions to keep them in their homes. Mm-hmm. But we also have a significant chronically houseless population that is consistently moved and pushed to other parts of the city. And we're not actually serving that population well at this moment.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty.
Other comments? Question, Dr. Smith, on this. So
absolutely.
Are you talking specifically now, are you getting our feedback on homelessness or houselessness broadly, or are you getting our feedback on housing specifically?
The way I specifically started with Commissioner Mapps' phrasing of housing stability, because he was the only one that phrased it that way. And so I wanted to open it up to see if the way in which he was, and part of that was I didn't realize he had housing stability and houselessness, right, as two separate categories. But like, was there anything in hearing housing stability that linked to, in your mind, what you said about houselessness, right? Like, were you thinking, like in hearing that, were you thinking, oh, that's houselessness for me, right? Like that, I didn't name it that, but that's what's coming up for me, because he was the only one that phrased it that way. Does that make sense, Mayor?
Yeah, it does. And I would argue, yes, of course, housing stability is a key part of it. You cannot separate housing stability or the lack of housing stability from the homeless crisis that we're experiencing. And I guess maybe the reason I interpreted it slightly more broadly is I see there being two aspects to homelessness. I'm greatly generalizing here. So don't hold this against me. But there is the longer term work that we do around rental protection, housing stability, regulatory ordinances around eviction, the work we do with our good partners at Multnomah County around the Joint Office of Homeless Services, which focuses on prevention. It focuses on transitional housing support. It focuses on mental health and substance abuse support. And obviously the work that we do jointly through the Housing Bureau and our regional partners around housing stock development and subsidized housing. But I separate that from the urgent crisis that is before us today. That in my mind, everything I just described is a longer term approach to stabilizing people in their housing. But I also want to put a highlight on the need, and I think Commissioner Hardesty raised this, and I don't want to put words in her mouth, but we need a FEMA-like response to the crisis we are seeing right now, just with the overwhelming numbers of people who are living on our sidewalks and in our public right-of-ways. It is creating a multitude of problems, not only for those people who are living in those conditions out in the elements, but without access to hygiene, without access to toilets, hand washing, laundry services, connection to other social services that they need. We have this exploding crisis on our streets today, and it requires a large-scale, focused, and immediate, urgent response, like a FEMA-like response, to get as many people as quickly and humanely off our sidewalks as possible. And I've started in my mind to separate the FEMA-like response that we need yesterday from those longer-term system supports that we're going to continue to be engaged in years from now. There is a problem that needs to be addressed today. And so that's why I separate those two things.
I think that's very helpful, and kind of going back to Jessica's intro around like what's short term, like what's like right now, right, in the next 12 to 18 months, and what are the things that we are kind of planning for, right, as we're moving forward. And we know we can't lose sight of that, right? But what, as you said, is the immediate need right now, right? So I thank you for articulating that, and your colleagues are nodding their heads as well. Anyone else want to add to this before we go on? We've got just a couple of more, and then I want to pivot us to our exercise to kind of look at what you named in a different way, a little bit deeper. So any other comments specific to this? Commissioner Ryan.
Yeah, Dr. Smith, if I'm hearing you right, any more comments on houselessness?
The housing stability, right? Just this kind of, I think there seems to be some general consensus about this. So I don't want to spend, a lot of time on it, but I want to make sure that we are.
I'm okay with that. We're spending a little bit of time here. It's probably the number one priority that every voter is talking about. So I think that I liked everything that's been said so far. And I do believe that, the North Star on this is stable housing, that maybe could be measured that someone's in stable housing for 3 years and is, using services and working, and, so there's that. Then there's people on the streets. My point is, as a system, as leaders, we failed to build a system from the streets to stable housing. So there's a lot of silos and little pockets in between, but what is the overarching system that we as government leaders in both the city and the county are behind that move someone. A very challenging process that goes from the streets to stable housing. And since we are known as a region to have really, really high proportionality of chronically housed, those with mental health issues, those with substance abuse issues, and those who have been houseless for over a year. That's why it feels like absolutely what's been said, an emergency, a FEMA type response is needed, because it's so chilling when you're just walking around, driving around town at this time. So I think for me, it's such a shared responsibility with the county, since so much of this is in the area of behavioral health, and they have most of the employees, if you will, that do a lot of the work to provide those services with this population. And so I just want to make sure I'm always articulating that it's a shared responsibility with the county for sure.
Okay, good. Thank you, Commissioner Ryan. And that might be your kind of drilling down into, as we begin to think about some goals to get after some of these priorities.
Yeah, and I actually want to end with that. We don't have any metrics that really, there's no real data that at any given time that shows how many people are in any one of those parts of the continuum, and what practices help one move from one place to the other. And so, I think I just want to say out loud right now that the sector, if you will, has been amazing over the decades to put this patchwork together. And then just the last 5 years or so, we now have significant resources that are coming in, and especially with Here Together. So it's like, what's the pivot from, say, the Home for Everyone to the Here Together type response that we can all get behind? That's both the county and the city that's shared.
Okay, thank you. Anything else on this? We're going to talk for a moment about economic recovery. And I don't want to lose Commissioner Hardesty's point around smart transportation, because that was one that stood out. Not in a bad way, Commissioner Hardesty, don't take that. Don't take that the wrong way. Commissioner Rubio, anything else on our conversation around houselessness, homelessness, housing stability?
Thank you. So I agree with what everyone said about the short-term distinction from the long-term as well, or the overarching goals as well. I do want to say an essential component of the short-term must include culturally specific services, so that we are able to address root causes that are really specific to the experience of the communities, especially those that are disproportionately overrepresented, and how houselessness and homelessness shows up differently in different communities.
Okay, thank you for that, Commissioner Rubio. And Commissioner Hardesty, yes.
Excuse me, Dr. Smith, before you move on, I just wanted to make a case for in the short term, I suspect that many of the hotels and brand new apartment complexes that are brand spanking new and empty will end up on a foreclosure block some way, shape, or form. And it would be my hope that the city is like all over those opportunities, because honestly, if you think about all the empty, overpriced apartments that are in the city of Portland right now, we could actually house every houseless person today. But the people who have them would rather they be empty until they can make big money on them, because it's already built. So I guess they're not losing any money in the process. I don't understand how that process works. But what I would hope is that we are economically prepared to take advantage of these opportunities as they come up, and that we identify as the city what are the rules that we can use to expedite those kind of processes if necessary.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. Kind of getting at some of what could be some goals and some ways that we get after this. Yes, please go ahead, Commissioner Ryan.
No, I like what's going on here. We could just stay here for a little while. Because I have some lived experience where putting a houseless, chronically housed person into a housing unit wouldn't have worked. And so what are the behavioral health services that are going to be invested as a part of the system so there can be stable housing for that individual? So I just wanted to, I guess, put more voice into the fact that it's so not just about housing, it's about behavioral health services and peer-to-peer services.
I guess the question is, do we know the percentage that is so, right? Because I don't want to assume because somebody's houseless that they need social service support. People are houseless because they can't afford to live in the city of Portland. And so I think we need data to figure out what is the percentage of our chronically houseless community members who, even if you put them in housing, they could not be successful without wraparound supports. So and I don't know that we've had that conversation.
Well, the last point in time count, which is now pretty dated because there's about a year lag anyway. And so it was in 2019 in January, so 2 years ago. It was a really high percentage of those who are chronically houseless are also folks that are suffering from mental health or substance abuse. It's like 70%. What that revealed, as I believe. And so it is a high percentage of the chronically housed, which is over a year.
And what is the percentage of people who are houseless that we perceive as chronically houseless?
Oops. I've heard, again, the data's old,
right?
But it's a pretty high percentage. And what I've also heard is that when they've compared it to other regions around the country, other cities, that ours is the highest, like we're at a much higher level. And that doesn't shock anyone, because if you've looked at Oregon's ranking in mental health services and as a system, we all know this started back in the Reagan administration nationally, but as a state, we've failed to build that system. We're always ranking between 45th and 50th in terms of that mental health system. So that's part of this urgency crisis, which is why it's such a shared responsibility with the county.
I appreciate that, Commissioner, because for me, I don't want to start with the assumption that without mental health support services, we can't house people, because I don't agree with that. I think everybody needs a house, right? And then we figure out what else people need. That's just my personal opinion, but I appreciate your...
No, it's, there's a lot of different, one reason why we have to keep getting better data sets is because of this conversation.
Yes.
But of our unsheltered population, over 50% are chronically homeless. And
let me just say that I bet COVID has doubled that number because if people were on the edge before COVID and they lost their minimum wage job, we don't know what the impact of that has been. So I'm just cautious about putting percentages to houseless folks, because people are houseless for a whole bunch of reasons.
Yeah, I think we can safely say we're in an emergency situation, and we can also safely say we've kind of failed to build a system for this. And so I think, the first step to recovery is admitting you have a problem. And it seems like we just have to get really blunt about that.
So hopefully ballot measure 110 will help us resolve that. But the reality is that we don't have enough culturally competent service providers. So even if we had all the money in the world, if we don't have culturally competent service providers that can provide the service, we will still be in the same bag that we're in.
And that goes, I know.
This is such a complex conversation, so I'm glad that we could hang out here a little bit longer. But as you can tell by the passionate dialogue that,
So let me jump in here, because the conversation, Commissioner Ryan, that you're having with Commissioner Hardesty, in my opinion, dovetails nicely with my differentiation between the FEMA-like response that's required right now. We don't have time to build the systems of care that are required, or frankly, the level of affordable housing infrastructure that will be required in the near term to meaningfully address the urgency of the crisis, the emergency situation in front of us today. And so the question I have is, what would our FEMA-like response be to this? How do we, as quickly and humanely as possible, connect people to a safe, dry, warm location with access to a toilet, hygiene facilities, and potentially access to services as quickly as possible? If we wait for Oregon to build a mental health infrastructure, or for us to have anything close to on-demand substance abuse treatment, we're going to grow old in the process. But
that's not what I was
getting. It's here today.
Yeah, I hear you. I wasn't getting at that.
No, I know you do. I know you do.
But
I just saw an opportunity there to dovetail the two.
Yeah. Where are we in the facilitation? Are we supposed to? Obviously, we're having a great dialogue.
I told you in the beginning I was gonna put some bumpers, right? But
Commissioner Ryan, she left.
I did. I went to go see what my daughter needed. No, I didn't do that. I'm here. So I want us to have some conversation about economic recovery, and as I mentioned before, Commissioner Hardesty also brought up smart transit. And so I want to make sure that we leave some time for that, because we do have another little piece of this that we want to get to. But this is good, because you're kind of doing the next step in this, in the conversation that we're having. And I'm happy it's being recorded, and I'm sure other people are taking notes. I'm trying to scribble what I can, because this is good stuff, right? And I think that as you were listening to one another, and I can ask this question at the end, are you seeing those spaces where there is a shared understanding and a shared agreement, right? And, a way to collaborate and sort of get after some of this stuff, right? So if we feel comfortable, I want to move on to the conversation about economic recovery. And specifically, Commissioner Rubio named it as economic recovery. And Commissioner Ryan, I think you had prosperity, economic recovery, kind of as some of the terminology you used as well.
Yeah, economic survival is what I said.
Okay, survival. Thank you. I can't read my writing. So I want to give you all an opportunity to kind of share what you were thinking, like what's coming up as you are defining that. And it was not something named Commissioner Mapps, Commissioner Hardesty, or the mayor kind of in their list of priorities. But again, sort of talking about this for a moment, are there places in the priorities that they did name, like, oh, okay, right? Like that's something that fits, right, with what I'm thinking in another priority area. I just didn't call it that. I just didn't name it that, or sort of, flesh it out that way. So Commissioner Rubio, since you've been, I want to hear your voice to make sure we got all our voices in the space. So I will let you go first and kind of share how are you defining economic recovery? What's coming up for you with that?
Thank you. And also, just to be transparent, I actually entitled it Economic Relief
thank you.
Recovery for business and community.
Thank you.
Because like everyone else, I was trying to really distill down as much as I can, but while keeping true to what I was saying. I think, some of the goals I had just very broadly are continue to strengthen and expand economic relief for small and BIPOC-owned businesses during this time. Also, strengthen existing food security systems in our community so that people have enough and have what they need, and that our food pantries and our systems are not running bare or empty as they are currently. Also, to continue support for workers that are ineligible currently for state funds and federal funds via the Oregon Worker Relief Fund. And then last, I have significantly increase or meaningfully increase our city's capacity. And this means partnering with other jurisdictions as well as needed to provide digital access during this time as well. I do feel that this is part of an urgent need.
Okay, thank you. And sorry, Commissioner Rubio, I want to make sure I said it correctly. So economic recovery / relief for business and community. Okay, so we got the whole phrase there.
I'm so sorry, I forgot one more, which is
please.
Very important. It might be more of a strategy rather than its own goal, but to make sure that we expand the city's language accessibility to ensure that the broader public has access to this information. That is a huge gap that has been happening ongoing, and people are working to close that gap. But as a tactic, for example, prioritizing the pay differential and starting with community-facing programs or essential persons in bureaus that are essential to this relief or recovery would be a strategy.
Okay, excellent. All right, so some things there around BIPOC business, some things around communication in our communities, what that looks like. Okay, Commissioner Ryan, this was another area that you named as a priority specifically. So I want to hear what you're thinking there, and then I'll give some time for your colleagues to respond.
Yeah, much what I've heard around economic survival, I was hearing from Commissioner Rubio, just getting down to food when the dialogue was about what are we going to do after the moratorium's lifted. So as a council, what is our work plan to prepare for that? What's going to feel like a cliff, perhaps. So there you go. Let's add another emergency to this. Then there's those that have been successful, if you will, in this city, investing in this city, providing a lot of jobs for Portlanders. And, all you have to do is look. It was actually published, I think, in Alignment Week yesterday. The reputation of Portland by, say, real estate investors has taken a really gripping nosedive. We're like 66, I think, out of 80th. And just a few years ago, we were like number 2. So I can't look at that and not react to it as a concern, a growing concern. And our economic survival and then recovery is so dependent on the other issue we were just talking about. And so it builds upon it. The houselessness emergency is in the way of thinking that we could turn that around. Perception is reality. And as proud as Portland's been over the years, this is pretty humbling to see us make such a dramatic nosedive. And so that's why it's really important that I think we provide really good services for those that want to invest in the city, because that's how we feed the coffers for our services for the houselessness and for other causes that are part of the value system that we have as a city and as a council. So I'm really concerned about revenue streams.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Ryan.
And this is like definitely going long-term. Like what's happening now is you think our budget's tough this year. If this perception rate stays there and the investments continue to plummet, where will we be in budget dialogue 2 years or 3 years from now?
Okay. Y'all had me wanting to hop in as an ad hoc commissioner, but I can't do that. I'm facilitating.
That's the downside of being a facilitator, right?
I'm like, dang it, I want to respond. Okay, Commissioner Hardesty, that's not what we're doing today. Okay, Commissioner Hardesty.
I just wanted to say economic stability is certainly something that I care about, and it's a priority. I didn't put it on my list because I was trying to be frugal on my list. But I will say that the work that the mayor and I have been able to do with Prosper Portland since this COVID crisis started has been some really phenomenal work. I mean, I was not a big fan of PDC and wasn't that excited about Prosper Portland, but it is clear that they have embraced leading with race. And they've done it in a way that is both transparent and has had a big impact on BIPOC communities. And so it is definitely on my agenda and something I care greatly about. I just didn't put it on my top 3 priority list. So I'm glad that Commissioner Rubio and Commissioner Ryan had it on their list because I can champion it with them.
Awesome. Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you.
Comments, Mayor, Commissioner Mapps?
Commissioner Mapps, did you want to go ahead and then I'll jump in after you?
You're on mute, Commissioner Mapps.
Sorry about that. Obviously, I agree. I think that economic recovery is incredibly important. And another way to think about this would be COVID recovery, COVID management. If you take a look at my list, a lot of that, my list also kind of gestures towards that, especially on housing stability. My sort of top 3 issues really are about COVID recovery, or at least surviving the COVID crisis. I also think that, fundamentally, the way that we're going to get our economy going is to conquer this virus. And so that's a piece that I'm really focused on. I'd like to see us work with our partners at the county and the state to get as much vaccine in people's arms as fast as we can, because I think ultimately that's our way to kind of fix this. But obviously, in the meantime, people need to eat. They need to, school doesn't work unless you have a working computer and internet access, and making your rent or your mortgage payment is incredibly important too, and just access to healthcare. So it's very important. I think I might start with the vaccine piece, partly because I think we need to be doing much better on that, and it's a mechanical task that I think if we just kind of gave them the convention center and every other big space and got the fire department out there giving shots, we could actually bend that curve a little bit.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Max. And Mayor, anything to add on this point?
Yeah, I do. First of all, since we have a lot of our bureau directors here, I want to acknowledge, I think the city's done a really great job with regard to the COVID recovery and our allocation of CARES dollars, the quick way in which we organize to support both households and small businesses in terms of household prosperity, housing support, and small business support. In particular, we focused on BIPOC communities because they were the first and the hardest hit by the impacts of the pandemic and the economic downturn. So I just want to acknowledge that this council already has a very strong record on that front. Obviously, we're going to continue to prioritize recovering from the COVID pandemic and its resulting economic impact. Shared economic prosperity has been and will continue to be, I believe, a priority of everyone on this council. The reason I didn't mention economic prosperity in my top 3 was, number one, because we have a brutal facilitator who ascribes to the Roman tradition of only allowing 3 when the list should probably be longer than that. But
or 4. I said or 4.
Since we're on this one, I actually believe I did prioritize our employers in the list that I put forward, because when I meet with our employers, whether they're large corporations or whether they're small mom and pop businesses, other than the obvious, which is they're closed because of COVID or they're greatly reducing their revenues because of COVID, what they mention is safety, homelessness, and livability. Those are the issues that they routinely mention over and over and over again as being impediments to their ability to be successful in this city. And I share Commissioner Ryan's concern about the real estate profile that was mentioned, I believe, in Willamette Week. And again, their lack of confidence isn't just because of the closure of the economy. They're comparing us head to head with other cities. And the reason they are frustrated by the city of Portland and believe that we are a higher risk proposition is because of some of these other issues related to safety, homelessness, and livability. And so I just want to acknowledge that all of these things, as I said up front, they're related. We can't pull one thread out without touching all the other pieces of this.
Awesome. Thank you, Mayor. So if there's nothing else on this particular point, I want to allow Commissioner Hardesty to talk a little bit around smart transit, because that was something that she specifically named that was not repeated, right? So I want to make sure we give some space for that. And then if colleagues have comments or questions to respond in response to her. So Commissioner Hardesty.
Excellent. Thank you. So when I think about smart transit, I think about as we are attempting to reach our climate goals, are there opportunities to support our small restaurants across the city by closing off some streets to auto traffic? I'm also really thinking about, is it possible when we are in the rebuild mode coming out of COVID to really think about what would a car-free downtown look like, right? And I say this because I think that there is this misperception that one day we're going to go back to business as usual, right? COVID will be behind us and we're going to flip a switch and life will be as it was prior to COVID. I think that there's a lot of people that believe that, and I am not one of them. I believe life will be radically different post-COVID, and our planning should reflect our new reality. So as I think about smart transit, I think about, is there an opportunity to create international districts in different parts of the city that people can access for food and goods and services that are not tied to people getting in their automobiles and traveling somewhere? That's for me, that's one of the exciting things about having transportation at this moment. Let me also go back and I also want to think about, how do we create opportunities for electric vehicle infrastructure in different parts of the city so that we can ensure that BIPOC community members have access to both building it and actually being able to take advantage of using it. I also want to make sure that we are identifying federal resources that traditionally federal transportation dollars have been all about freeway expansions. And I'm looking for federal resources to support a climate resilient transportation department that is really focused on green issues as compared to freeway expansions like we're so accustomed to. So when I say smart transit, those are some of the components under it. Oh, and one of the big ones is actually trying to identify a new funding source for PBOT that is not dependent upon people driving automobiles and not dependent on people parking in parking garages. We are facing a $40 million budget deficit because our normal funding mechanisms are not have been impacted by COVID, A, and B, they should be impacted by our climate justice resiliency goals, right? And so that's going to be a real big one, is trying to identify new funding opportunities to create a smart transit system, smart transportation system.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. Are there comments, responses from colleagues?
I generally support Commissioner Hardesty's vision here. I think it's innovative, and I'm happy to work with her to make a lot of these things happen.
I also support it. It sounds pretty in line with a lot of our goals, particularly around equity.
Okay, Commissioner Ryan, Mayor, anything here?
Yeah, it felt very connected to climate crisis. I know it was stated transportation, but that's what I kept hearing. It's not in my top 3 or 4, but I respect what I just heard.
Okay. And Mayor, anything from you?
Yeah, I appreciated it. It sounded more like the answer to a broader question. It sounded tactical. And but I think it is in alignment with our stated goals around climate action and transportation equity.
Okay.
But I would see that as one of multiple strategies that are fulfilling the larger objective.
Yes.
Okay, that's
But
good.
I want to say this. I actually love innovative and visionary thinking, and I appreciate that. It's a good vision.
I did leave out continuing to prioritize investments in East Portland, but it's on my list.
Very good. Okay, and I just realized when I was looking down at my notes, Commissioner Rubio, you had a comment around the arts, and I don't want that to get lost, and my apologies. So we will, and I think that will have covered everyone's list. I want to make sure we give you some time for that, and then we can pivot into the next part of this, which I said we've kind of been overlapping some of it, so it's all good. So Commissioner Rubio, you want to give a little bit more around your priority specific to the arts?
Sure, and it won't take very long. I originally debated whether this was something immediate or if it comes later. But I'm very interested in reactivating public spaces and what that means for us in this time of having experienced a long disconnection in community. And maybe this could connect well with maybe, again, back to what Commissioner Maps indicated around complete neighborhoods. And maybe that's where it might, connect very nicely. But this pandemic has required Portland to stay home for a year now. And in an effort to reconnect community with outdoor spaces and a way to build reconnections, I also am very aware about the health implications of this as well. So that it would require some thinking, but it would also require or enable us to start to engage with the arts community about how the reemergence of our community together in public and what that might look like. I don't quite know where that would fit in our sequencing or our timeline, but I think it's a way to re-engage with a really important part of our city, which is the arts sector.
Thank you, Commissioner Rubio. Commissioner Hardesty, yes.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Thank you, Commissioner Rubio. I am 100% in support of you. You may not know that I am the self-appointed music commissioner. I used to have this fight with Commissioner Nick Fish on a regular basis, but I think it would be exciting to bring the arts and the music community together as we start re-emerging, because honestly, it's the arts and the music that actually feeds people's soul, even when we don't have a lot else going on, right? So I am very happy to partner with you and figure out how we combine the arts in a way that actually elevates those voices. And I believe the mayor actually had been working with BRAC to figure out how we maintain the public art that's been created around the Black Lives Matters protests. And if that's the case, I think that that's also a very good opportunity for us to be respectful of the art that was produced during this very trying time in our history and make sure that it moves with us into whatever the future holds.
I love that idea. It's great.
Can I jump in on this? I want to jump in on the Amen chorus here. I think it's great. And I think number one, I think there's a potential source of funding through this, assuming additional CARES dollars. And while some may not see it this way, I believe it is critically important as part of helping people heal and recover from the COVID crisis. And let's not kid ourselves. Mental health issues have risen dramatically while we've all been penned inside. Alcohol and substance abuse has increased dramatically. Mental health issues, alarmingly, disproportionately, those experienced by young people have spiked. And frankly, we are social creatures. And as the restrictions ease, I hope we do have good plans to utilize our public spaces in ways that are effective and help support, as we have as a council, our arts and culture community to get through the COVID crisis just from an economic perspective. And also, as you said, Commissioner Rubio, what's good for arts and culture is good for the soul. And you two commissioners are in a uniquely excellent place to collaborate. Commissioner Hardesty, in her role as PBOT commissioner, obviously controls a lot of our public right-of-ways. And PBOT has done some terrific work to respond quickly to the changing needs of businesses during the COVID crisis. You, as our arts commissioner, are in a unique position to help with some of the ideas that you've put forth. And Commissioner Hardesty, I approve your appointment as our self-appointed music commissioner. We all get to put our taste on the table as well, good, bad, or ugly. But I think this is a great area for council collaboration. And I think it will also, at some level, help rebuild civic pride. I think a lot of people feel that a lot of what was great about Portland has really dissipated over the course of the last year in particular. And I think a lot of that is just the loss of arts and culture in our culinary community and our ability to socialize the way Portlanders like to socialize. And so this could be a really important stepping stone towards community recovery. And I appreciate you, Commissioner Rubio, for raising it.
Okay, yeah, I went off topic while I was gone. I'm just teasing. I got disconnected.
Dr. Smith, I had my hand up.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in, and I won't say too much because it's all been said, but I was going to add music and film to that term. And I always put arts under my comments about the economy and recovery, and it is all connected to those three areas of the vast arts, music, and film industries. They're a big part of our economic driver. So I'm all in. But I just want you to know I had it under that category earlier, but I'm glad that we pulled it out and gave it more attention since I come from the arts.
And I think I can make it unanimous. I think the arts are an important part of our city's economic recovery, our spiritual recovery. And I think earlier today, we kind of talked about Portland's image problem right now. And I think reawakening the arts is another way of showing the world a different face of Portland, the face of Portland that I think we all know and love. And it's critical. And I look forward to working with Commissioner Rubio and our new music commissioner to tell Portland's story again through the arts.
I've been a music commissioner for 2 years, so I took it from Commissioner Fish. So
you're doing a great job. All right, thank you.
We want to see what's in our music collection first.
Oh, you would love my music collection. It is very eclectic. You would be shocked.
No, I wouldn't be. I'm sure I wouldn't be, but we'll do that sometime. I'd love to see it and hear it.
Deal. Sorry, doctor, we get sidetracked easily.
No, that's okay. This is part of building community with one another, right? It can't always just be business, right? Let's pull out some CDs and some records. I'm all for it. Okay.
Pull out some what? Pull out what?
I said, listen. I don't own any CDs anymore. I use my phone, but
it's right.
I just want to
right next to the steam generator.
I just want to, for all to make this. Anywho, okay. So if we feel good with where we are at this point, I want to move us on. We've got about 30 minutes or so. So Jessica, I know we probably could have changed the slide an hour ago. I'm sorry, but if you're still out there, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so again, I told you I'm a visual learner. I try and appeal to other people that might be visual learners, maybe not. But for me, so this is a concept map, and this is something that we won't necessarily be able to complete in our time together today. But I think it's something that you could be thinking about as our conversation has sort of morphed into people sharing some of their goals, right, as related to their priorities. But I think actually sort of gathering that and sort of getting that down to, and here it has 6 spaces, right? This is just an example, right, of what this could look like. However many branches you have off of this, I think, can vary. But this will really help you see. So if we're saying, for instance, and this is what I've sort of noted, we've talked about community and public safety, houselessness, homelessness, housing stability as kind of a component of that. We've talked about livability, economic recovery, and prosperity. See if I'm missing anything. I think those are the kind of the big ones. Yes. And then we've had some additional conversation around the arts and smart transit, right? But if you were to take, let's just take, for instance, houselessness, because we had a pretty rich discussion about that a little while ago, and really put this in the center, right, in terms of our concept map here, like what are the goals that in your mind, right, if we're really going to tackle sort of this immediate need, this immediate crisis, this 12 to 18 months, like what are the things that we need to be thinking about as goals, as articulated goals to address our crisis of houselessness, right? So that's kind of an example of how this would look, okay? So questions about kind of this visual, pretty simple, right? But I think it's a way to sort of organize our thoughts. And again, we don't have time today necessarily for that, but I want you to be thinking about for the priority areas. So the other thing we're going to talk about before we depart is, we've got some commonality. What are kind of maybe those four, right? I'm going to, force you to sort of think, what are the four collectively that you all can say, okay, these are the things that we're going to move on. And then taking each of those four priorities and really creating a concept map for the goals, right, that we need to articulate to get after that, right? So that's sort of the next, in my mind, the next step. Doesn't have to be, but that's what I'm thinking. Okay, so we can see how that feels. Jessica, can you go to the next slide? And so this is around like, where's their goal alignment? Where's there an issue or any divergence? And here you can think goal, priority. We've kind of, sort of interwoven them in our conversation. And what are opportunities for collaboration? I heard that coming up, right? Immediately, there's some folks that are like, yes, Commissioner Hardesty, I'm all about, let's have this conversation about what our transportation and what transit looks like, right? And Commissioner Rubio, yes, let's get after the arts, right? I'm all on board for that. So certainly hearing opportunities for collaboration. So where is there some alignment in what we're thinking? And here, I don't want to just, goals, because we haven't had a chance to really flesh that out necessarily. It's just sort of kind of organically come up as you all were describing the ways in which you define this work. But where are the places that you're seeing for alignment? I want us to spend just a little bit of time there. And is there anything that we are seeing as maybe an issue or some divergence? So, and how are we going to name these? I think that's another piece because, are we going to say houselessness? Are we going to say homelessness? Like, how are we going to name the priority? I think is also a really important part in terms of your alignment here. Okay, and hopefully that's making sense because we don't want Commissioner Hardesty saying it's houselessness. And, the mayor's like, well, I said it's homelessness, right? Like, so what are we going to have a shared agreement about? Like how we name this, okay? So Commissioner Hardesty has her hand up. Commissioner Ryan, is your hand up from previous?
Yeah,
Maybe?
it is.
Oh, okay. All right. Want to make sure. Okay. So Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. I was just going to say, I was taught years ago to use the term houselessness by people who were experiencing houselessness. And the reason is that when you are houseless, wherever you are is your home. Right. So and so I adopted that language probably about a decade ago. But I am, whatever works for our team will be fine with me. But that is why that term has stuck with me, because houseless community members told me that that was the appropriate term.
Good. And thank you for that. Because I was going to kind of do a fist to five, right, to see where we are. First, how are we feeling collectively about, and I want you to kind of replace goal with priority here, because we have to dig into the goals a little bit more in a next session. But collectively, how are we feeling about houselessness? If we're going to name houselessness, thank you, Commissioner Hardesty, for giving some background about why we're naming it that. How are we feeling collectively, and are we in alignment with that as a priority as a council? So 5, yes, all on board. We can kind of go from there. 0's like, I'm getting ready to log off the Zoom. I'm done for the day. Like, where are we? So if I can get a show of hands, where are we as houselessness as a shared part, Mayor? Now, you know I was a teacher. I see you over there texting. Okay.
Are you just
Yes.
waving, Mayor, or was that a yes, I'm in?
It is definitely one of my top 3 priorities, along with safety and livability.
Okay, hold on. We're not there yet. Okay, so.
And I don't have a huge stake on how we name it. I think we know what we're talking about.
Okay, so 5. So houselessness, are we feeling good based on Commissioner Hardesty's description of why we are naming it houselessness? Anyone have any opposition to that? Feel good about that? Mayor's like, that's all good.
Yeah,
Commissioner
look,
Rubio's nodding.
I don't want to get hung up on the terminology, because then we go down this endless spiral. The only caution I want to throw out is a lot of people on our streets are lacking more than just a house.
And that we might be able to articulate as you think about your goals, Mayor. So I'll offer that as maybe a way to make sure that we're capturing that. So absolutely right. Okay, so houselessness. So we are in agreement that that is, we're in alignment with that as a shared priority. Okay, so next I want us to talk about, we've named it community and public safety. But before we sort of decide like where we are with that, are we in alignment, fist to 5, that that is a shared priority amongst the 5? So let me see hands. 5, 5, 5. Okay, excellent. So we can spend just a little bit of time talking about how we articulate that. I agree with the mayor. We don't want to get so hung up necessarily in the terminology, but I do think it's important that we're talking about it the same. I want to offer that, right? Like, so that there's not confusion when we are bringing these things up in other spaces. So we said community safety, we said public safety. Is it both? Could we do a community/public safety? How are we feeling about that? So I want to hear from folks on that.
Sure, I'll step in. I've been using the word community safety for some time, because I do think that our path going forward is shared responsibility with community and with community organizations, whereas public feels like it's more of an internal system only. So
okay,
that's why I think that's the main reason why I switched from public to community when I started thinking about it that way. And I've just never gone back, kind of like with the word houselessness.
okay. So we've got to vote for community.
And I would just say for me, I think the term public safety is most closely connected to police. And so when I say community safety, it's broader than just talking about police, right? I think the public is, when you say public safety, you're thinking police officer, even though we have many more first responders than just police. I think the term just leads us to believe that we're talking police, and I think it's much broader than that.
Okay, thank you. Other comments, thoughts about, so we got Commissioner Hardesty, Commissioner Ryan saying community, Commissioner Rubio gave a thumbs up, community safety. Commissioner Baps, you good? Okay, Mayor, anything? Good? Okay, so community safety.
Well, I just want to make sure that the mayor in his conversations, are you comfortable with that term, Mayor? Does it cause you any concern that people will not understand what you're articulating?
No, because I tend to articulate at great length what I'm thinking. And as I did in the introduction, I think people would be very clear that when I'm talking about community safety, I'm not just talking about policing, that it goes well beyond that and requires partnerships and collaborations that go well beyond local law enforcement.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks.
Okay, we're
Just
doing
wanted
great.
to check before we move.
No, I appreciate that, Commissioner Hardesty. You're absolutely right. Okay, so I next had livability, right? Kind of as a couple folks named it that. We had some discussion. I want to see where our alignment is. How are we feeling about livability as a shared priority? Fist to 5. Let me see hands. 5. Okay. Commissioner Ryan's off mute. Okay, so so Mayor and Commissioner Mapp said, oh, Commissioner Hardesty, is that a 5? Is that a?
I know I did not have a
Okay,
5. I was
okay.
trying to figure out how many fingers to put up, but I'm going to wait and hear what Commissioner Ryan says.
Well,
Okay.
I'm stalling because I'm trying to play this game here, thinking we have 3, and I don't know, maybe I'm lost in the process, but I think a lot of us started commingling the word with the economy, but I don't want to put words into anyone's mouth. So for me, it was an overarching statement, but it didn't feel like one of the top 3 priorities. It's an outcome. If we focus on these top 3 priorities, then we're going to have livability. But that's in my little brain at this moment. So someone want to tell me, did you give me a different point of view on that? I'm still open. But right now I don't have it as my top 3 priority.
Commissioner Rubio, were you trying to weigh in?
No, I sort of am where Dan Ryan is. I think there were aspects of it, but I don't feel like I have thought it through as one singular concept. So that's why it probably doesn't rank for me. But there were components of things that Commissioner Mapp said that I really liked in that. But yeah.
I think that's what I'm struggling with too, Commissioner Rubio, because the definitions I totally agreed with, right? But in my mind, a lot of the work is in housing and houselessness, right? So creating, continuing to create livable neighborhoods, right, where people can have activity. I'm not opposed to livability. I just don't know if it was it certainly would not be on my list of top priorities, right? I mean, I won't go out and talk bad about livability, but it doesn't, the definitions I agree with, but the term livability actually feels different than what we talked about in the definition.
And I want to offer, Mayor, I see your hand. Could this be, and kind of going back to Commissioner Ryan's comment, are we maybe thinking about this as economic recovery or prosperity? Don't know, just putting that out there, right? Because that's another conversation that we had. So I just want to put that in the space. Mayor, your hand was up.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And whether it makes it in the top priorities for the council or not, I'd like to continue to be point on this for the council. I believe it's extremely important, and I think it's extremely important for 2 reasons. Number one, it gets to our sense of place and our civic pride. And I hear regularly and loudly from our constituents that they're deeply upset by the condition of public right-of-ways, parks, camps, roadways, sidewalks, buildings. And in answer to your specific question, does this have something to do with economic prosperity? The answer is absolutely, insofar as a failure to address it can potentially choke off economic opportunities. And so I would continue to prioritize it. The second reason I'd continue to prioritize it is this doesn't fall on anybody else's shoulders. This is the city's responsibility. When it comes to my narrower, livability is one of those huge words. It's like sustainability. And for those of us who are old enough to remember the word synergistic, it can be very broadly interpreted. I mean it fairly narrowly. I mean trash, litter, needles, graffiti, and stuff that should not be in the public right of way that is. And people look to us to manage that. And frankly, we're getting much better at it, but we're not there yet. And I would like to continue to prioritize that, because if people look around their city and they feel like it looks more like a dystopian future than the beautiful, dynamic, innovative, and environmentally conscious city that they're used to seeing, it will ultimately drag us down. So I would continue to prioritize it in that narrow sense, and would like to offer myself to continue to lead on behalf of the council on this subject, whether it's a council priority or not.
Okay, thank you, Mayor.
Could I
Appreciate
ask
that.
a question? I mean, so is the plan at the end of the day that we have 4 or 5 priorities that are council priorities?
I think we can talk about that. And Jessica, if you kind of want to weigh in like that, I think we're trying to certainly give everybody an opportunity to articulate what their priorities are and kind of the goals and getting after those priorities, but having some shared understanding of what that means is really going to help. Like, so from a bureau director's perspective, like, oh, okay, I know the council has articulated community safety and houselessness. Like, what am I doing within my bureau to make sure that, you know, we're getting after that, right? Like, so that I think is, you know, it gives you all some direction, gives bureau, you know, citywide some direction. And so I'll let Jessica kind of chime in, but
let me just say that it feels like that 3 of what we've listed as priorities are priorities that we all share, right? And there are other work that all of us are involved in that we may or may not share as priorities. And so I would offer, if the goal is to have, say, 5, or I don't know what the magic number is, whatever the magic number is, and the mayor feels really strongly about livability, I'd be happy to be a 5 and support the mayor on livability, as these are the council's top 5 priorities, right? It doesn't mean that I have to take it on as my own personal mission, but it just means I would be supporting the mayor and continuing to articulate his vision around livability, right? So I'm just trying to get a sense. If we're going to be limited to 3, then the mayor's on his own with livability. But if there's an opportunity for us to, I think that it would be really significant for the public if, in fact, we had a top 5 that we all agreed that whether all 5 of us are working on it or not, at least all 5 of us agree these are the council's top priorities. And if that's our goal, then I would be a 5 and support the mayor.
I support that strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was not a magic number, by the way. So I want to put that out there. Yeah.
I have a question. I thought one of our goals, though, is to make sure that we're all aligned, no matter what our bureau assignments are, on the goals that the top priorities that we come up with. So
yeah, that would be true.
So that's where I want to pause right now then, because so far the 3 that we've identified, I'm sensing there's all 5 of us are all in, no matter what our bureau assignments are. We know that we're accountable to these top priorities. I continue to think that livability is, when you do these 3 things, you have livability. So to me, it's connected to our top 3 priorities as an overarching statement. And so I guess that's the only reason I don't have it as one of the top 3, because I think it summarizes all 3 of them. That's just the way I think.
Could I say something?
Yes, please, Commissioner Rubio. Sorry.
That's okay. So I agree, Dan, with what you're saying about that if you have those 3, they are livability. I just feel like it's worth stating too that I think for a long time and for many communities, the word livability sometimes is a proxy for something else, which means that can feel very excluding broad communities from the broader like civic work that we're trying to do and that we're trying to accomplish. So I have some discomfort with leading with that. But if we are going to lead, but I do at the same time agree with what Commissioner Hardesty about, if it's very important narrowly to the mayor, you know, I will support that. But I feel like, you know, if we do, it has to be very, very carefully explained, or like the description of what we mean by that. So if we have to use it, I would support it in that regard if it's very narrowly explained. But if we can, I would love to see it embedded in these other goals that can result in that as well. That would be my preference, but I will work with both avenues.
Thank you, Commissioner Rubio. And Mayor, you had your hand up.
Yeah, that's an important statement that Commissioner Rubio has just made. And I gravitated towards the word livability just because I wasn't smart enough to think of something else. It does not have to be the word livability. And I think we can put our thinking caps on that and find a better way to express it that isn't loaded or have a negative historical connotation. I'd be happy to consider that. I appreciate the comment.
Thank you.
Lovely. This is so good. Okay. So top three, we have houselessness. We're good with that. We're good with community safety. And then I want to make sure, was economic recovery, prosperity number 3? And are we saying both economic recovery, prosperity, or one? Like, how do we want to phrase that?
That's a really good question, because I mean, right now it's about sustaining people where they are, right? And then it's about creating economic opportunities when we come out of this pandemic. So I'm not really sure how we should actually articulate that. And maybe it's because I do think your directions were immediate, short term, and then long term. And so I think if we're in the immediate frame, we would be talking about economic stability, right? Because we have a lot of economically unstable community members right now, right? And hopefully with new COVID dollars coming in to address that, we could actually help stabilize people where they are. But the longer term plan would be all about economic, I would call it economic prosperity, that centers BIPOC communities in our recovery.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. Mayor, did you have your hand up? Maybe?
No,
Yes.
I took it down. Sorry, I'd left it up and forgot to take it down. I apologize.
No worries. Commissioner Ryan, yes.
Oh, yeah, I was just using the word survival, which I think was similar to what I was hearing from Commissioner Hardesty. What did you just use? Stability, right?
Yes, she said stability.
Yes, that says stability, yes.
So it's like there's a lot of survival is going to need to take place, especially when you think about the moratorium being lifted. And so that gets me just thinking about, food. People need food. People need shelter. And then there's recovery, which then eventually, I guess I look at everything as a continuum that gets you to prosperity. So I'm glad the economy is in the top 3, and I'll just end with that.
Okay, very good. Commissioner Maps, and then, yes.
I might point out that it seems like we're avoiding naming the elephant in the room, which is COVID. I think that we all have long-term goals in terms of economic prosperity and shrinking the wealth gaps that are out there. But really, I think the thread that unites everyone who kind of mentioned the economy and just survival is, COVID relief and COVID recovery. Also point out that I think our publics and our constituents are going to understand that, and that's going to kind of they're going to know exactly where we are. On the other hand, when we talk about economic recovery, that can mean, one thing to the guy who wants to build an office tower in Portland, and a different thing to a single mom east of 82nd who, hasn't been able to pay all of her rent for the last 6 months.
Thank you. So survival, economic survival.
I'd say COVID recovery or COVID relief and recovery. Like, that's frankly how I talk about it when I'm out in the world. But I don't want to have a fight over this.
No.
If it's helpful, great. If it's not.
Commissioner Rubio, you want to have a comment, and then we'll
I agree with Commissioner Maps about, I think there's something important about naming it. So whether it's in the heading or it's somewhere else, but I think it's important to state that is top of our mind every day.
Agreed.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I guess the question is it like COVID stabilization, right? And then afterwards, we're talking about economic recovery and actually, what comes after that? Because I agree. I mean, what we know from Mike Myers and the ECC is that we have a lot of families that are food insecure.
Yep.
And that's not going to change anytime soon, right? So it does feel like we're kind of ignoring the crisis and actually talking about like what we're going to do when we're crisis free, which, you know, feels a little disingenuous, right? As we bring this out into the community. And so, I would think that we would want to lead with doing all we can to keep people stable until we are through this COVID crisis. And then after that, have our list of top 3 that we as a council are actually focused on. I think we could get too far in the weeds about, you know, what we can do and what we want to do coming out of COVID. But right now, I think all hands on deck around surviving COVID.
Okay, Commissioner Ryan and then the mayor, and we're going to, so COVID stabilization, right, is kind of what I've written down as the naming of our goal 3, but Commissioner Ryan, mayor.
I will just say for the record, like everyone, it's been on my mind and I've thought about it in my top 3, but I focus a lot on where there's control and influence for what the city does. And I just know with this one, the state and the county come before us and with so many of the operations. But that's probably why it wasn't in my top 3. But I have it as an overarching goal, or just a fact. It's a condition. It's a condition that affects all of these things. But I just hope that we're really cognizant of how we partner with the county and the state on this.
And that's certainly as we begin to articulate like goals, Commissioner Ryan, I think that I'll offer like that could be that space, right? As we sort of drill down into this.
Thanks. The role clarity is what I was getting at. Yeah.
Okay, Mayor, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Jessica to close us out.
Yeah, I've thought about what Commissioner Hardesty said, and in all of my conversations, I always have to start off with the COVID crisis is obviously the environment which we're currently operating. But given that this will probably be covered, given that we will probably be leading to a document that will be publicly disclosed, I think we probably should make it crystal clear that we acknowledge the COVID crisis, and the recovery efforts that we're engaged in are the immediate context in which we are operating. We will continue to all work very hard on that, along with each and every city bureau, as we have been doing. But I think Commissioner Hardesty is right on this. I think we do need to overtly and clearly acknowledge that.
Okay.
Oh man, I'm going to record that. I don't hear that often. I hear Commissioner Hardesty's right. I'm too bad my recording wasn't on there. Sorry.
Well, and I said in this case, just to be clear.
I knew there was a caveat.
Okay, everyone, we can take a breath. Thank you for indulging some time with me. I'm going to turn it back over. Jessica, I don't remember if this is your slide or not, but I'm going to take a break from talking and make it be your slide.
You are fabulous. You are a fabulous facilitator. Thank you. This is like herding 5 cats, right?
It was awesome. I feel honored. I feel honored for the
I think we're all pretty situated though, so yeah.
Dr. Smith, thank you so much for your facilitation today. This is the hardest group probably in the city to facilitate, and I think we all feel heard and respected, and we're coming out of this a much stronger and more unified council. So I want to thank you for your leadership on this.
You're absolutely welcome. It has been my pleasure and joy today. So I was looking forward to it. All right. Thank you. Jessica?
Sure. So in the couple of minutes that we have remaining, I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the next steps. So I did not put on the slide, and I should have, a group communication. I think absolutely that would be a fantastic and an essential next step. So I'll go back and I'll work with some communication folks and the folks on each of your team to try to refine maybe a joint press release that can go out, that can talk about the path forward. I do think that, and we expected that, having this conversation at a high level, only having 2 hours to talk about all of these complex issues that we weren't going to have enough time to really get to the nitty-gritty details that are required when we're identifying goals. And I think identifying those goals will actually help refine what these priority areas really mean, and we'll see more commonality once we start getting to that level. So that will be the work that is to be done in some follow-up sessions. We have most closely to us right now, the February 2nd work session has already been scheduled on community safety. That's going to be led by Chief Administrative Officer Tom Reinhardt. We have some work sessions that are in the works. There are various bureau leaders and program leaders that are talking about bringing information to you all, specifically on some critical issues related to Central City recovery and our Central City revitalization and economic recovery that I think will dovetail well with some of the goals and the issues that you care about. We have, of course, several hours of budget work sessions in March, and I will be looking for ways for us to tailor those work sessions and the budget decisions that we will see at the end of this month coming our way, and tailor those sessions to connect to this conversation and make sure that we're tying in your budget decisions with some of these priority areas. And then I want to keep an open conversation around other requested information and sessions. It sounds like we definitely need a follow-up on really trying to drill in and define what we need and what our goals are around houselessness, and particularly the current crisis that we're dealing with right now, and anticipating the crisis that is going to come and hit us hard in March, and when the freeze of paying for rent is over. So other items and requests for sessions, please reach out to my office, and I will convene and work with other bureau directors to make sure we get you the information we need. It is now 4 o'clock, so unless there are other questions or items that anybody has for me or for anyone else, I think we can close. And Mayor, I'll turn it back to you to close the session.
I have one quick question, Jessica, before you turn it back over to the mayor. I see there's a work session on Central City revitalization, but not on businesses all over the city. Is there a reason why we're only focused on downtown and not all business recovery?
So what I am aware of is that there has been a collaborative working group across bureaus that has been actively talking about the crisis that is happening downtown. And they have been talking about different strategies that they are working on together downtown. There may also be other conversations that are happening around neighborhoods outside of the downtown core, and I will look into that and find that out. But what I'm hearing implied is that you would also like a conversation around neighborhood vitality and issues that are happening outside of the Central City.
I would be very concerned if the only conversation we had about revitalization was about downtown, because a lot of areas businesses are hurting. So, yeah.
Yeah, there are other conversations going on about the business districts and the neighborhoods, as well as the industrial districts. So I agree with that. That point is well taken.
I have a point. Can we look at the data to see? Because some of the data I've seen does show a disproportionality of blight and challenge downtown compared to neighborhoods. So I just want to see the data. That's all.
And to be clear, we're talking Central City, which is more expansive than downtown.
Right.
I want to be crystal clear on that point. Good. Excellent. Thank you. We'll make sure we clarify that. So I'll just say thanks, everybody. Again, Dr. Smith, thank you, colleagues. Great discussion. This is what work sessions are all about. I'm really honored to work with all of you. I think this bodes well for the year ahead. Thank you all for your time. We are adjourned.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.